The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Liberty as Sarah Mitchell adjusted her uniform for the 100th time. At 19, she was the youngest recruit in her unit, and every single day reminded her of that fact. Her fellow soldiers never let her forget it either. The dog tags around her neck felt heavier than usual as she made her way to the mess hall, the metal clinking softly with each step. "Hey, baby Mitchell," called out Corporal Jenkins from across the courtyard. "Try not to trip over your own feet today." Sarah kept walking, her jaw clenched. She had learned early on that responding only made things worse. The nickname Baby Mitchell had stuck from her very first day when she had accidentally saluted a supply sergeant, mistaking his chevrons for officer stripes. The mistake had been innocent enough, but, in military culture, innocent mistakes became legendary stories that followed you everywhere. Inside the mess hall, the usual crowd was already gathered around the long metal tables. Sarah grabbed her tray and moved through the line, keeping her eyes focused straight ahead. She had hoped that after 6 months, the teasing would die down, but, if anything, it seemed to be getting worse. The other recruits saw her as an easy target, young, small, and seemingly fragile. "Mitchell!" Sergeant Rodriguez barked from behind the serving counter. "You're on KP duty again today. Kitchen patrol. Someone needs to teach you how things work around here." Sarah nodded silently. Kitchen patrol meant she would spend the entire day scrubbing pots, cleaning floors, and hauling garbage. It was punishment duty, usually reserved for soldiers who had broken rules or failed inspections. But, for Sarah, it had become a regular assignment, another way for the senior staff to remind her that she didn't quite belong. As she carried her tray to an empty table, she overheard a conversation from the table behind her. "I heard General Morrison is coming for inspection next week," Private Davis was saying. "They say he's a real hard case. Kicked 3 recruits out of his last base for being too soft." "Good," replied Private Thompson. "Maybe he'll see what we see. Some people just aren't cut out for military life." Sarah knew they were talking about her. They always were. She ate her breakfast quickly, the food tasting like cardboard in her mouth. The dog tags around her neck seemed to grow heavier with each bite. These weren't ordinary identification tags. They held a story that Sarah had never shared with anyone at Camp Liberty. A story that would change everything if anyone bothered to read them carefully. After breakfast, Sarah reported to the kitchen where Mrs. Henderson, the head cook, was already preparing for the lunch rush. Mrs. Henderson was a civilian employee, a kind woman in her 50s who had worked on military bases for over 20 years. She was one of the few people who treated Sarah with genuine kindness. "Morning, honey," Mrs. Henderson said warmly. "You're on pot duty again, I see. Those boys giving you trouble?" Sarah shrugged as she tied on her apron. "Nothing I can't handle." Mrs. Henderson studied her face carefully. "You know, Sarah, I've been working on military bases longer than you've been alive. I've seen all kinds of soldiers come and go. The ones who talk the loudest aren't always the ones who fight the hardest when it counts." "Thanks, Mrs. Henderson, but I'm fine." "Really?" As Sarah began scrubbing the large cooking pots, she thought about her conversation with her father before leaving for basic training. Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell had served 3 tours overseas and earned more commendations than most soldiers see in their entire careers. But Sarah had never told anyone about her family's military history. She wanted to make it on her own merit, without writing on her father's reputation. The military isn't about proving you're tough, her father had told her. It's about proving you can be trusted. Trust is earned through consistency, reliability, and honor. The rest is just noise. But the noise was getting louder every day. During lunch service, Sarah worked quietly in the background while the other recruits ate and joked at their tables. She could hear fragments of their conversations, most of which centered around complaints about their training officers, speculation about weekend passes, and endless discussions about who was the strongest, fastest, or most likely to make it through advanced training. Mitchell called out Corporal Jenkins as he brought his empty tray to the kitchen window. "Make sure you get all the grease off these plates. We don't want to get sick from your sloppy cleaning." The other soldiers laughed, and Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment. But she simply nodded and took the tray without a word. Mrs. Henderson watched the exchange with a frown but said nothing. She had learned that interfering usually made things worse for the recruits. That afternoon, during combat training, Sarah found herself paired with Private Marcus Webb, one of the larger and more aggressive soldiers in her unit. Webb was from Texas, built like a linebacker, and never missed an opportunity to demonstrate his physical superiority over smaller recruits. "Try not to get hurt, baby Mitchell," Webb said as they squared off for hand-to-hand combat practice. "I'd hate to send you to the infirmary on your first day with a real soldier." The training instructor, Staff Sergeant Collins, watched with interest. Collins was known for letting the recruits work things out among themselves, believing that military life was tough and soldiers needed to learn to handle pressure. Webb lunged forward with a move that was more aggressive than necessary for a training exercise. Sarah sidestepped smoothly, using his momentum against him, and managed to put him in a submission hold that surprised everyone, including herself. For a moment, the entire training ground fell silent. "Lucky shot," Webb muttered as he got back to his feet, his face red with embarrassment. Again, Staff Sergeant Collins called out, clearly intrigued by what he had just witnessed. This time Webb was more careful, but Sarah's movements were fluid and precise. She had been trained well, though she had never mentioned her years of martial arts training or the private lessons her father had arranged with military combat instructors. To everyone else, she was just a small, quiet girl who happened to get lucky. After training, Sarah headed to the barracks to clean her equipment and prepare for evening inspection. The barracks were largely empty, most of the other recruits having gone to the rec room or the base store. Sarah preferred the quiet moments when she could think without the constant pressure of proving herself. She pulled out her dog tags to clean them, something she did every evening as part of her routine. The tags were regulation military issue, but unlike the standard identification information, these tags told a different story. Along with her name, service number, and blood type, there were additional markings that indicated her family's military heritage and her father's current rank and position. Sarah had specifically requested that this information be included, not out of pride, but as a reminder of the legacy she was trying to live up to. Her grandfather had served in World War II, her father in Iraq and Afghanistan, and her older brother was currently deployed overseas. Military service ran in her blood, but she was determined to earn her place based on her own actions, not her family name. As she polished the metal tags, Sarah thought about the upcoming inspection by General Morrison. She had heard more details throughout the day. Morrison was known for his high standards and his ability to see through facades. He had a reputation for recognizing real soldiers, regardless of their background or appearance. Maybe this is my chance, Sarah thought to herself. Maybe someone will finally see past the surface. That evening, during dinner, the conversation at every table centered around the upcoming inspection. The other recruits were nervous, discussing what they needed to do to impress the general. Sarah listened quietly, eating her meal and observing the dynamics around her. "I heard Morrison can spot a fake soldier from a mile away," Private Davis was saying. "He's got this way of looking at you that sees right through all the BS." "Good thing some of us are real soldiers then," Webb replied, shooting a meaningful glance at Sarah's table. After dinner, Sarah was walking back to the barracks when she encountered a group of her fellow recruits near the supply building. They were huddled together, whispering and occasionally laughing. As she approached, they suddenly fell silent. Well, said Corporal Jenkins. "If it isn't Baby Mitchell. We were just talking about you." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. "I need to get back to the barracks." "Hold on there," Jenkins stepped in front of her. "We've been thinking about the inspection next week. You know, about how we want to present our unit to General Morrison." The other soldiers formed a loose circle around Sarah, not threatening exactly, but clearly not planning to let her leave easily. "See, the thing is," Jenkins continued, "we're concerned about how our unit looks. We've worked hard to build a reputation here, and we don't want anything to damage that reputation." "I don't know what you mean," Sarah said, though she was beginning to understand exactly what they meant. "We mean," Webb stepped forward, "that maybe you should consider whether military life is really for you. Maybe you should think about requesting a transfer. Or better yet, maybe you should just wash out now before you embarrass yourself in front of the general. Sarah felt her heart pounding, but she kept her voice steady. I'm not going anywhere. I earned my place here just like everyone else. Earned? Jenkins laughed. You've been on KP duty more times than anyone in the history of this base. You can barely keep up during PT. And don't even get me started on your performance during weapons training. It was true that Sarah struggled with some aspects of military life. She was smaller than most of the other recruits, and certain physical tasks were more challenging for her. But she had never quit, never complained, and never asked for special treatment. I'm not quitting, Sarah said firmly. Well, Jenkins smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. Maybe you just need a little more motivation to reconsider. Before Sarah could react, Webb stepped forward and grabbed the chain around her neck, yanking her dog tags free with a sharp tug that scraped against her skin. Let's see what we have here, Jenkins said, examining the tags. Sarah Mitchell, blood type O positive, born. He stopped reading and frowned. These are weird. There's extra stuff on here. The other soldiers crowded around to look, but, in the dim light near the supply building, they couldn't make out all the details clearly. Probably just some mistake by whoever made them, Davis suggested. Or maybe she's trying to look more important than she is, Webb added. Jenkins pocketed the dog tags. Tell you what, Mitchell. We're going to hold on to these for a while. Maybe losing them will help you remember that you don't really belong here. You can't do that, Sarah protested. Those are military property. It's against regulations. A lot of things are against regulations, Jenkins replied. But sometimes soldiers need to look out for their unit, even if it means bending a few rules. Sarah reached for her tags, but Webb blocked her path. Don't worry, baby Mitchell. We'll give them back when you decide to do the right thing and transfer out. With that, the group dispersed, leaving Sarah standing alone near the supply building. She touched her neck where the chain had been, feeling naked and exposed without her dog tags. Those tags weren't just identification, they were a connection to her family, her heritage, and her purpose. But, more than that, they contained information that would completely change how everyone at Camp Liberty saw her. Information that would silence the jokes and the doubt. Information that would prove she belonged there as much as anyone else. As she walked back to the barracks, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't report the theft of her dog tags. She wouldn't ask for help from the officers. Instead, she would prove herself through her actions, just as her father had taught her. And, when General Morrison arrived for inspection, she would find a way to demonstrate that being a soldier wasn't about size or loudness or fitting in with the crowd. It was about honor, duty, and the courage to keep going even when everyone around you believed you couldn't. Sarah fell asleep that night with her hand pressed to her throat, missing the familiar weight of her dog tags. But she was more determined than ever to show everyone at Camp Liberty exactly what kind of soldier she really was. The next morning brought news that changed everything at Camp Liberty. Staff Sergeant Collins gathered all the recruits in the main assembly area, his expression more serious than usual. The morning sun was barely visible through the thick clouds that had rolled in overnight, casting the entire base in a gray, somber light. Listen up, people, Collins announced, his voice carrying across the silent formation. We just received word that General Morrison's inspection has been moved up. He'll be arriving this afternoon instead of next week. A ripple of nervous energy passed through the assembled recruits. Sarah felt her stomach drop. This afternoon? She had been counting on having more time to prepare, more time to prove herself without her dog tags. This means we have exactly 6 hours to make sure this base is inspection ready, Collins continued. Every uniform will be perfect, every bunk will be regulation, and every soldier will demonstrate the discipline and professionalism that Camp Liberty is known for. Jenkins caught Sarah's eye from across the formation and smiled that same cold smile from the night before. He patted his pocket where her dog tags were hidden, a gesture that only she could see. Platoon leaders will assign special duties for today's preparation, Collins went on. This is not a drill, people. This is the real thing. General Morrison has the authority to recommend transfers, discharge recommendations, and commendations based on what he sees today. After dismissal, the base erupted into a frenzy of activity. Soldiers scattered to their various assignments, some cleaning and polishing, others practicing drill formations, and still others preparing equipment for demonstration. Sarah waited for her assignment, knowing it would probably involve more kitchen duty or some other task designed to keep her out of sight during the important parts of the inspection. Mitchell, Sergeant Rodriguez called out as the other recruits dispersed. "You're on special assignment today." Sarah approached, expecting the worst. Rodriguez was one of the harder instructors, known for his strict adherence to regulations and his low tolerance for what he considered weakness. "Sir?" Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. "I'm putting you in charge of preparing the memorial garden for inspection. It needs to be perfect, every stone in place, every flag properly positioned, every plaque polished to perfection." The memorial garden was located at the center of Camp Liberty, a place where the base honored fallen soldiers from various conflicts. It was one of the most visible and important areas that the general would see during his inspection. Being assigned to prepare it was either a sign of trust or a setup for failure. "Understood, sir," Sarah replied. "Mitchell," Rodriguez added as she turned to leave. "The memorial garden represents everything this base stands for. Honor, sacrifice, service. Don't let us down." As Sarah walked toward the memorial garden, she passed groups of soldiers working on their various preparations. She could hear fragments of conversations about the inspection, about General Morrison's reputation, and about who would make the best impression. "I heard he once made a colonel cry just by looking at him wrong," one recruit was saying. "My brother served under Morrison in Germany," another added. "He said Morrison could tell if your boots were dirty from 50 feet away." The memorial garden was indeed in need of attention. Fallen leaves covered the pathways, some of the brass plaques had tarnished, and several of the small American flags needed to be replaced. Sarah looked around at the scope of the work and realized she had been given an impossible task for one person to complete in just a few hours. But she also realized something else. This was her chance to do something meaningful, something that would matter regardless of whether she impressed anyone during the inspection. The memorial garden honored soldiers who had made the ultimate sacrifice. Working here felt like connecting with something larger than the petty politics and social dynamics of recruit life. Sarah began by carefully collecting all the fallen leaves, making sure not to disturb any of the memorial plaques or decorative stones. As she worked, she read the names and dates on the various memorials. Some commemorated soldiers from World War II, others from Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Each plaque told a story of service and sacrifice. One plaque in particular caught her attention. It honored a group of soldiers who had died in Afghanistan, including the inscription, "They served with honor, died with dignity, and live forever in our memory." Sarah paused, thinking about her father's tours in Afghanistan and her brother's current deployment. As the morning progressed, other soldiers occasionally passed through the garden on their way to various tasks. Most ignored Sarah completely, but a few made comments about her working alone in the memorial area. "Figures they'd stick baby Mitchell somewhere she can't mess anything up too badly," she heard Webb say to someone as they walked past. Sarah continued working, polishing each plaque until it gleamed, straightening every flag, and carefully arranging the decorative stones around each memorial. The physical work was demanding, but she found it strangely therapeutic. For the first time in months, she felt like she was doing something that mattered, something that connected her to the deeper purpose of military service. Around midday, Mrs. Henderson appeared with a bag lunch and a thermos of water. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, setting the food on a nearby bench. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. You didn't have to do that." The older woman looked around at Sarah's work. "You've done a beautiful job here, honey. This place looks better than it has in months." Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead and looked at her progress. About half the garden was complete, gleaming and perfectly arranged. But she still had several hours of work left and only a few hours before the general's arrival. "Mrs. Henderson," Sarah said hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." How do you know when you belong somewhere? How do you know if you're really meant to be in a place? Mrs. Henderson sat down on the bench and was quiet for a moment. Well, I think sometimes it's not about fitting in with everyone around you. Sometimes it's about serving something bigger than yourself, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. She gestured toward the memorial plaques. These soldiers didn't serve because it was easy or because everyone liked them. They served because it was the right thing to do, because something mattered more than their own comfort. Sarah nodded, understanding what Mrs. Henderson meant but still feeling the weight of her isolation from the other recruits. I've watched you for months, Mrs. Henderson continued. You work harder than most, complain less than anyone, and treat everyone with respect even when they don't return it. That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of soldier you are. After Mrs. Henderson left, Sarah returned to her work with renewed energy. She was determined to make the memorial garden perfect, not just for the inspection, but as a tribute to the soldiers it honored. As the afternoon progressed, word spread that General Morrison had arrived on base and was beginning his inspection tour. Sarah could hear increased activity from other parts of the base, shouted commands, the sound of formations marching in unison, and the general buzz of heightened military activity. She was putting the finishing touches on the last section of the garden when she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up to see a small group of officers walking toward the memorial area. In the center of the group was a tall man with silver hair and more decorations on his uniform than Sarah had ever seen in person. General Morrison. Sarah quickly stood at attention, her heart pounding. She had hoped to finish her work before the inspection reached this area, but the general's tour was ahead of schedule. At ease, soldier, General Morrison said as he approached. His voice was deep and commanding, but not unkind. The general walked slowly through the memorial garden, examining Sarah's work. He stopped at several of the plaques, reading the inscriptions carefully. His expression was thoughtful and respectful. Outstanding work, soldier, he said finally. This is exactly how a memorial should be maintained. Thank you, sir, Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. General Morrison continued his examination of the garden, occasionally asking questions about specific memorials or commenting on details of Sarah's work. The other officers in his group took notes and exchanged glances, clearly impressed with what they were seeing. What's your name, soldier? The general asked. Private Sarah Mitchell, sir. Mitchell, the general repeated thoughtfully. Are you related to Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, by any chance? Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This was exactly what she had been trying to avoid, being recognized because of her family connections rather than her own merit. Yes, sir. He's my father. General Morrison nodded slowly. I served with your father in Afghanistan. Fine officer. One of the best soldiers I've ever known. The other officers in the group looked surprised. Clearly, none of them had known about Sarah's family background. However, the general continued, I'm not interested in who your father is right now. I'm interested in who you are. And, based on what I see here, you're a soldier who understands what service really means. Relief washed over Sarah. The general wasn't dismissing her own accomplishments because of her family name. If anything, he seemed to be acknowledging her individual merit. Tell me, Private Mitchell, how long did you spend preparing this memorial garden? All day, sir. I started this morning after the announcement about the inspection. All day? By yourself? Yes, sir. General Morrison exchanged a look with one of his accompanying officers. That's a considerable amount of work for one person to complete in such a short time. As they prepared to leave the memorial garden, General Morrison paused and turned back to Sarah. Private Mitchell, you should be proud of what you've accomplished here. This memorial honors fallen heroes, and you've treated it with the respect it deserves. After the inspection group moved on, Sarah remained in the garden, still processing what had just happened. She had been recognized by General Morrison himself, and not because of her father's reputation, but because of her own work and dedication. But her sense of accomplishment was short-lived. As evening approached and the formal inspection activities concluded, Sarah realized she still faced the same problems that had been plaguing her for months. Her dog tags were still missing, her fellow recruits still saw her as an outsider, and tomorrow she would likely return to the same pattern of isolation and kitchen duty. That night, after the evening meal, Sarah was walking back to the barracks when she encountered the same group of soldiers who had confronted her the night before. This time, however, their attitude seemed different. Word had apparently spread about her encounter with General Morrison in the Memorial Garden. "So," Jenkins said, his tone less aggressive than before, "I heard you had a little chat with the general today." "It was just part of the inspection," Sarah replied carefully. "Just part of the inspection?" Webb stepped forward. "That's not what we heard. We heard he spent a lot of time talking to you specifically." Sarah could sense that the dynamic had shifted somehow, but she wasn't sure in which direction. "Look," Jenkins continued, "maybe we were a little hard on you before. Maybe we jumped to some conclusions." He reached into his pocket and pulled out Sarah's dog tags. "Maybe it's time we gave these back." Sarah reached for the tags, but Jenkins held them just out of reach. "The thing is," he said, "we're curious about what made you so interesting to General Morrison. We took a closer look at these tags, and there's some stuff on here we don't understand." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. In the dim light of the evening before, they hadn't been able to read her dog tags clearly. But now they had had all day to examine them thoroughly. "What kind of stuff?" Davis asked, crowding closer. Jenkins held the tags up to catch the light from a nearby lamp post. "Well, for starters, there are some numbers here that don't match standard identification codes. And there are some letters that look like they might be rank indicators." Sarah's heart sank. They had discovered the additional information on her tags that revealed her family's military background. "In fact," Jenkins continued slowly, "these tags seem to indicate that our little baby Mitchell here comes from quite the military family." The other soldiers pressed closer, and Sarah realized that her secret was finally out. But, instead of the relief she might have expected, she felt a new kind of dread. Would they now treat her differently because of her family connections? Would they assume she had been getting special treatment or had advantages they didn't have? "Is it true?" Webb demanded. "Is your father really Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell?" Sarah lifted her chin and looked each of them in the eye. "Yes, it's true." The admission hung in the air between them like a challenge. Sarah braced herself for their response, knowing that this moment would change everything about her relationships with her fellow soldiers, for better or worse. The silence that followed Sarah's admission stretched on for what felt like hours, though it was probably only seconds. The other soldiers stared at her with a mixture of surprise, confusion, and something that might have been respect. Jenkins still held her dog tags, but his grip had loosened and his expression had changed from smugness to uncertainty. "Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell," Webb repeated slowly, as if testing the words. "The James Mitchell who served 3 tours in Afghanistan? The one who saved those trapped Marines in Kandahar?" Sarah nodded reluctantly. Her father's heroics had been well documented, earning him several commendations including the Silver Star. It wasn't something she had ever wanted to trade on, but now the truth was out. "Why didn't you tell us?" Davis asked, his voice lacking its usual mocking tone. "Because I didn't want special treatment," Sarah replied. "I wanted to earn my place here based on who I am, not who my father is." Jenkins laughed, but it wasn't the cruel laughter Sarah had grown accustomed to. It was more bewildered than mean. "Special treatment? Mitchell, we've been giving you the worst assignments for months. We put you on KP duty every chance we got. We made your life miserable." "I know," Sarah said quietly. "But you never complained," Thompson observed. "You never pulled rank or mentioned your family connections, even when we were." He trailed off, perhaps realizing for the first time how badly they had been treating her. "Even when you were bullying me," Sarah finished for him. The word hung in the air like an accusation. The soldiers looked uncomfortable, shuffling their feet and avoiding eye contact. "We weren't bullying," Webb protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Yes, you were, Sarah said firmly. You decided I didn't belong here based on how I looked, not on how I performed. You made assumptions about my ability without giving me a fair chance to prove myself. Jenkins extended the dog tags toward Sarah, his earlier bravado completely gone. Look, Mitchell, maybe we made some mistakes. Sarah took the tags and immediately put them back around her neck, feeling whole again for the first time in days. The familiar weight against her chest was comforting, but the conversation was far from over. Some mistakes? Sarah's voice was steady, but there was steel behind it. You took my military identification. You tried to pressure me into quitting. You spent 6 months making me feel like an outsider in my own unit. We didn't know, Davis said weakly. Know what? That my father was a decorated officer? Would that have made a difference? Would you have treated me better if you knew I came from a military family? The question caught them off guard because the answer was obviously yes, and they all knew it. That's exactly the point, Sarah continued. You should have treated me with respect because I'm your fellow soldier, not because of who my family is. Every person who enlists deserves a fair chance to prove themselves. Webb shifted uncomfortably. You're right, he admitted. We were out of line. It was the first genuine apology Sarah had heard from any of them, and it caught her by surprise. She had expected them to become defensive or to make excuses. The thing is, Jenkins said slowly, we had you all wrong. We thought you were some pampered civilian who wandered into military life by mistake. We thought you couldn't handle the pressure. But you never broke, Thompson added with what sounded like genuine admiration. We threw everything we could at you, and you just kept going. Sarah looked at each of them in turn. That's what soldiers do. We keep going, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. The group stood in awkward silence for a moment, each person processing the implications of this conversation. Finally, Jenkins spoke up again. So what happens now? Now we start over, Sarah said. We act like the professional soldiers we're supposed to be. We work as a team instead of against each other. Just like that? Webb asked skeptically. It's not going to be easy, Sarah acknowledged. Trust has to be rebuilt. But we're all in the same unit, and we need to function together. Over the next few days, the atmosphere at Camp Liberty began to change in subtle ways. Word of Sarah's family background had spread throughout the base, but not in the way she had feared. Instead of treating her differently because of her father's reputation, most of the other soldiers seemed to gain a new respect for how she had handled herself over the previous months. The fact that she had endured months of difficult treatment without ever playing the family card impressed even some of the toughest soldiers on base. Staff Sergeant Collins, who had observed the dynamics in the unit for months, made a point of acknowledging Sarah's perseverance during a morning formation. Some of you have been wondering about the inspection results from General Morrison's visit, Collins announced to the assembled recruits. I'm pleased to report that Camp Liberty received commendations in several areas, including facility maintenance and soldier dedication. He looked directly at Sarah. Private Mitchell's preparation of the memorial garden was specifically mentioned in the General's report as an example of the pride and professionalism this base represents. Sarah felt a flush of pride, but also noticed that several of her fellow soldiers were nodding approvingly instead of rolling their eyes or making snide comments. After formation, Jenkins approached her with an unusual request. Mitchell, I was wondering if you could help me with something. Sarah was cautious but willing to listen. What kind of help? Well, you obviously know more about military protocol than most of us. My younger brother is thinking about enlisting, and I want to make sure I give him good advice about what to expect. It was a small gesture, but significant. Jenkins was acknowledging her knowledge and experience, something he had never done before. I'd be happy to help, Sarah replied. Over the following weeks, similar interactions became more common. Webb asked for her advice about physical training techniques after observing her success during combat exercises. Davis sought her input on proper uniform maintenance. Thompson requested help understanding some of the more complex military regulations they were studying. Sarah found herself becoming a resource for her fellow soldiers rather than an outcast, and the change felt good. But, more importantly, she began to see that her approach to military service, focusing on duty, consistency, and respect rather than bravado or competition, was being recognized and valued by others. The real test came during a field training exercise 3 weeks after General Morrison's inspection. The entire unit was participating in a simulated combat scenario that would test their ability to work together under pressure. Sarah's team was assigned to secure a strategic position while under simulated enemy fire. The exercise was designed to be challenging, with multiple obstacles and time constraints that would push everyone to their limits. As they moved through the training course, Sarah noticed that Webb was struggling with a piece of equipment that was malfunctioning. In the old dynamic, she might have ignored his problem, knowing that he would have done the same for her. But, instead, she quickly moved to help him resolve the issue. "Thanks, Mitchell," Webb said quietly as they continued with the exercise. Later in the same exercise, when Sarah found herself pinned down by simulated enemy fire with no clear path forward, it was Jenkins who provided covering fire and created an opportunity for her to advance. The exercise concluded successfully, with their unit completing all objectives within the time limit. During the debrief session, the training officers noted the improved teamwork and coordination they had observed. "This is what military units are supposed to look like," Staff Sergeant Collins told them. "You functioned as a team, supporting each other and accomplishing the mission together." That evening, as the soldiers were cleaning their equipment and discussing the day's training, Sarah found herself truly included in the conversations for the first time since arriving at Camp Liberty. "You know what I realized today?" Davis said as he cleaned his rifle. "We wasted months fighting against each other when we could have been working together." "Yeah," Webb agreed. "We probably would have been a much stronger unit from the beginning if we had given everyone a fair chance." Sarah appreciated the acknowledgement, but she also understood that change was an ongoing process, not a single moment of revelation. "The important thing is that we're working together now," she said. "We can't change the past, but we can control what happens going forward." Jenkins looked up from his equipment maintenance. "Mitchell, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why didn't you ever fight back? I mean, you could have reported us for harassment. You could have mentioned your family background. You had options, but you never used them." Sarah considered the question carefully. "Because taking shortcuts wouldn't have solved the real problem. The real problem wasn't that you didn't know who my father was. The real problem was that we weren't functioning as a team." "But it would have been easier for you," Thompson pointed out. "Maybe in the short term," Sarah agreed. "But I didn't come here to take the easy path. I came here to become a better soldier and to serve my country. That meant proving myself through my actions, not through my family connections." Webb nodded thoughtfully. "That's pretty impressive, actually. Most people would have taken the easy way out." "Most people aren't trying to become soldiers," Sarah replied. "We're supposed to be held to a higher standard." As the weeks passed, Sarah's integration into the unit continued to improve. She found herself taking on leadership roles during training exercises, not because she demanded them, but because the other soldiers began looking to her for guidance and direction. Mrs. Henderson noticed the change during one of Sarah's visits to the kitchen. "You seem different lately, honey." "Happier. Things are better," Sarah admitted. "It took a while, but I think we're finally starting to work together as a unit." "I'm glad to hear it. You never deserved the treatment you were getting before." Sarah smiled. "It's not about what I deserved. It's about what we all needed to learn about being soldiers." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sergeant Rodriguez, who had a message for Sarah. "Mitchell, report to the company commander's office at 1400 hours. You're being considered for advanced leadership training." Sarah felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness. Advanced leadership training was competitive and demanding, but it also represented a significant step forward in her military career. "Congratulations," Mrs. Henderson said warmly. "You've earned it." As Sarah left the kitchen, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The months of isolation and struggle had been difficult, but they had also taught her important lessons about perseverance, integrity, and leadership. She touched her dog tags through her uniform, remembering the night they had been taken from her. At the time, it had felt like a violation and a symbol of her rejection by the unit. Now she understood that it had been a turning point, the beginning of a process that would ultimately make all of them better soldiers. The afternoon meeting with the company commander went well. Captain Williams explained that Sarah had been recommended for the leadership program based on her performance during training exercises, her dedication to duty, and her positive influence on unit cohesion. "Your fellow soldiers speak very highly of you," Captain Williams told her. "They say you've helped improve the overall performance of your unit." Sarah was surprised and pleased to hear this. She hadn't realized that her efforts to build better relationships with her fellow soldiers had been so noticeable. "I just tried to be a good teammate, sir." "Well, it's working. If you accept the leadership training opportunity, you'll be leaving Camp Liberty in 2 weeks for a 3-month program. It will be challenging, but it could set you up for rapid advancement in your military career." Sarah didn't hesitate. "I accept, sir." As she left the commander's office, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with her family background or anyone else's expectations. She had earned this opportunity through her own efforts, her own character, and her own commitment to being the best soldier she could be. That evening, she shared the news with her fellow soldiers. Their response was overwhelmingly positive, with congratulations and expressions of support that would have been unimaginable just months earlier. "You deserve this, Mitchell," Jenkins said, and Sarah could tell he meant it sincerely. "We all deserve the chance to succeed," Sarah replied. "That's what being part of a team means." 2 weeks later, as Sarah packed her belongings for the leadership training program, she reflected on how much had changed since her arrival at Camp Liberty. The barracks that had once felt hostile and unwelcoming now buzzed with genuine camaraderie. Soldiers who had once viewed her as an outsider were now offering advice for her upcoming training and promising to stay in touch. "Make sure you write," Webb said as he helped her carry equipment to the transport vehicle. "We want to hear about all the tough stuff they put you through. And don't let them intimidate you," Davis added. "You've already proven you can handle anything they throw at you." Sarah smiled at the encouragement. These were the same soldiers who had made her life difficult for months, and now they were acting like proud teammates sending off a valued member of their unit. Jenkins approached with something in his hand. "I wanted to give you this before you left." He handed Sarah a small, wrapped package. Inside was a compass with an inscription that read, "To a true soldier and leader, from your teammates at Camp Liberty." "We all chipped in for it," Thompson explained. "We figured you might need it for navigation training, but also as a reminder that you always know which direction is right." Sarah was touched by the gesture. "Thank you. All of you. This means more to me than you know." Staff Sergeant Collins arrived to escort Sarah to the transport area. Before they left, he addressed the assembled soldiers. "Private Mitchell is representing not just herself at this leadership program, but all of us at Camp Liberty. She's shown what it means to be a soldier through her dedication, perseverance, and integrity. I expect all of you to maintain the same standard of excellence while she's gone." As the transport vehicle pulled away from Camp Liberty, Sarah looked back at the base that had been both a challenge and a home for the past months. She could see her fellow soldiers waving from the barracks steps, and she felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that she was leaving behind a stronger, more unified unit than the one she had found. The leadership training facility was located in the mountains of Colorado, a place known for its demanding physical and mental challenges. Sarah arrived along with 30 other soldiers from bases across the country, all of whom had been selected based on their potential for military leadership. The program began immediately with an introduction from Colonel Sarah Peterson, the commanding officer of the training facility. Colonel Peterson was a formidable woman with over 20 years of military service and a reputation for producing exceptional leaders. Over the next 3 months, Colonel Peterson announced to the assembled trainees, "You will be tested in ways you cannot imagine. Physical endurance, mental toughness, decision-making under pressure, and, most importantly, your ability to inspire and lead others. Sarah looked around at her fellow trainees. They came from different backgrounds, different specialties, and different parts of the country, but they all shared the same focused determination that she had learned to recognize in serious soldiers. The first week of training was designed to break down any preconceptions or comfort zones the trainees might have brought with them. They were awakened at 0430 each morning for intensive physical training, followed by classroom instruction on military history, tactics, and leadership principles. During one particularly challenging obstacle course exercise, Sarah found herself paired with a soldier named Marcus Rivera from a base in Texas. Rivera was struggling with a rope climbing section that Sarah had mastered easily due to her smaller size and climbing technique. "Need a hand?" Sarah offered, extending her rope to help Rivera up. "Thanks," Rivera said gratefully as he reached the top. "I'm better with the heavy lifting stuff, but these ropes are killing me." "Everyone has different strengths," Sarah replied. "That's why we work as teams." Their instructor, Master Sergeant Thompson, had observed the interaction. During the debrief session, he used it as an example of effective leadership. "Leadership isn't about being the best at everything," Thompson explained. "It's about recognizing strengths and weaknesses in yourself and others, and creating situations where everyone can contribute effectively." As the training progressed, Sarah found herself naturally falling into leadership roles during group exercises. Her experience at Camp Liberty had taught her valuable lessons about building trust, communicating effectively, and maintaining team cohesion under pressure. During a complex tactical simulation in the fourth week of training, Sarah was assigned to lead a squad of 8 trainees through a night navigation exercise. The mission required them to locate specific objectives while avoiding detection by opposing forces. "Okay, everyone," Sarah said as they studied their maps and equipment. "Rivera, you're our heavy weapons specialist, so you'll take point on any defensive positions. Johnson, your communications background makes you our link to command. Chen, your medical training means you're responsible for any casualties." She continued assigning roles based on each person's strengths and experience, creating a plan that utilized everyone's abilities effectively. The exercise was challenging, with difficult terrain, limited visibility, and aggressive opposing forces. But Sarah's squad completed all objectives successfully while maintaining unit cohesion and avoiding casualties. During the after-action review, the training officers noted Sarah's effective leadership and her squad's exceptional performance. Private Mitchell demonstrated excellent judgment in task assignment and maintained effective communication throughout the exercise, the evaluating officer reported. Her squad functioned as a unified team and accomplished the mission with minimal resources. Word of Sarah's success began to spread throughout the training facility. Other trainees sought her advice on leadership techniques, and instructors began using her methods as examples during classroom instruction. But the real test came during the 7th week of training, when each trainee was required to lead a complex, multi-day field exercise that would determine their final rankings in the program. Sarah's assignment was to lead a mixed unit of 20 soldiers through a simulated humanitarian mission in hostile territory. The scenario involved providing aid to civilian populations while defending against enemy attacks and managing limited supplies. The exercise began at dawn on a Monday morning. Sarah's unit included soldiers with various specialties: medics, engineers, communications specialists, and infantry. Her challenge was to coordinate their different skills while accomplishing multiple objectives under time pressure. On the first day, everything went according to plan. Sarah's unit established a secure perimeter, set up medical aid stations, and began distributing supplies to simulated civilian populations. But, on the second day, the exercise controllers introduced complications designed to test leadership under pressure. A simulated enemy attack disrupted their supply lines, 2 team members were designated as casualties, and an equipment malfunction threatened their communications with command headquarters. Sarah gathered her remaining team members for a quick assessment. "We've lost 2 people and our supplies are cut off. Communications are down. But we still have civilians depending on us for medical care and security." She quickly reorganized her remaining forces, reassigning responsibilities and developing contingency plans. Instead of abandoning the mission or calling for extraction, she found creative ways to continue providing aid while maintaining defensive positions. Johnson, can you rig a communications system using the vehicle radios? Chen, we need to prioritize medical cases and stretch our supplies. Rivera, I need you to establish overwatch positions with the minimum number of people. The solutions weren't textbook perfect, but they were practical and effective given the circumstances. Sarah's unit continued to function as a team, adapting to challenges without losing sight of their mission objectives. By the end of the 3-day exercise, Sarah's unit had successfully completed all primary objectives and several secondary goals despite the setbacks they had encountered. Colonel Peterson personally conducted Sarah's final evaluation. Private Mitchell, your performance during this program has been exceptional. You've demonstrated natural leadership ability, sound judgment under pressure, and the ability to inspire confidence in others. Sarah felt a surge of pride, but remained focused on the colonel's assessment. More importantly, Colonel Peterson continued, you've shown that true leadership comes from character and commitment, not from rank or authority. Your fellow trainees respect you because you've earned that respect through your actions. The graduation ceremony was attended by family members and commanding officers from the trainees' home bases. Sarah was surprised and moved to see Staff Sergeant Collins and several of her fellow soldiers from Camp Liberty in attendance. We couldn't miss this, Jenkins explained during the reception following the ceremony. You're representing all of us here. Besides, Webb added with a grin, we wanted to see you get the recognition you deserve. Colonel Peterson announced the final rankings during the ceremony. Sarah had finished second in her class, an achievement that would significantly impact her future military career. The top graduates of this program will have opportunities for advanced assignments and accelerated promotion, Colonel Peterson announced. They represent the future leadership of the United States military. As Sarah received her certificate and commendations, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. The months of struggle at Camp Liberty, the theft of her dog tags, the gradual process of earning respect from her peers, all of it had contributed to her development as a leader. After the ceremony, Sarah had a chance to speak privately with Colonel Peterson. I've been reviewing your file, the colonel said. Your father's military record is impressive, but what you've accomplished here is entirely your own achievement. Sarah nodded. That was always the goal, ma'am. To succeed based on my own merit. Well, you've certainly done that. I'm recommending you for assignment to the 82nd Airborne Division. It's a challenging assignment, but one that will give you opportunities for rapid advancement. The 82nd Airborne was one of the most prestigious units in the military, known for its demanding standards and elite soldiers. Assignment there would represent a significant step forward in Sarah's military career. I accept, ma'am. Thank you for the opportunity. Colonel Peterson smiled. Don't thank me yet. You'll earn every bit of recognition you get with the 82nd. They don't give anything away. That evening, Sarah called her parents to share the news of her assignment and graduation. Her father was proud but not surprised by her success. I always knew you had the potential to be an exceptional soldier, Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell told her. But I'm even more proud that you insisted on earning it yourself. You taught me that integrity matters more than shortcuts, Sarah replied. That lesson served me well. It will continue to serve you well throughout your career, her father said. The military needs leaders who understand that character is more important than connections. Sarah's mother was equally proud but more emotional about the assignment. The 82nd Airborne sounds so dangerous, she said with concern in her voice. All military service involves risk, Mom. But I'll be serving with the best soldiers in the world. We look out for each other. Before leaving the training facility, Sarah received one final surprise. Rivera, Johnson, Chen, and several other trainees presented her with a plaque commemorating their time together. To Private Sarah Mitchell, Rivera read from the inscription. A leader who shows us that strength comes from character, not volume. Thank you for teaching us what it means to be soldiers. Sarah was deeply moved by the gesture. These soldiers had become genuine friends and teammates, proving that military service could create bonds that transcended backgrounds and personalities. The flight back to Camp Liberty gave Sarah time to reflect on everything that had changed over the past months. She was returning as a different person, more confident, more skilled, and with a clearer understanding of her purpose as a soldier. But she was also returning with a new appreciation for the importance of teamwork, the value of perseverance, and the power of treating others with respect and dignity. When she arrived back at Camp Liberty, Sarah was greeted by her former unit members who were eager to hear about her experiences and celebrate her success. "So what was it like?" Davis asked during dinner that first night back. "Challenging," Sarah replied. "But not any more challenging than what we went through here, just in different ways." "Come on," Thompson pressed. "You graduated second in your class from one of the toughest leadership programs in the military. That has to feel pretty good." Sarah smiled. "It does feel good. But what feels even better is knowing that we all grew together as soldiers. The program taught me leadership techniques, but you all taught me about the importance of trust and teamwork." Jenkins raised his water glass in a toast to Sarah Mitchell, who showed us what it means to be a real soldier. The other soldiers raised their glasses as well. To Sarah Mitchell, they chorused. But Sarah raised her own glass with a different toast. "To all of us," she said. "For learning that being a soldier means supporting each other, no matter what." As they drank the toast, Sarah touched the dog tags around her neck. The tags that had once been hidden from her as a symbol of rejection had become a symbol of her journey toward acceptance, leadership, and genuine military service. 3 weeks later, Sarah packed her belongings once again, this time for her assignment to the 82nd Airborne Division. Her fellow soldiers gathered to see her off, but this farewell was different from the previous one. This time, she was leaving as a friend, a leader, and a respected member of the military community. "Keep in touch," Webb said as he helped load her gear. "And remember us when you're a general someday," Davis added with a grin. Sarah laughed. "I'll remember all of you, but not because I think I'll be a general someday. I'll remember you because you taught me that military service is about more than individual achievement. It's about being part of something larger than yourself." As the transport vehicle pulled away from Camp Liberty for the final time, Sarah looked back at the base where she had learned so many important lessons. The memorial garden where she had worked alone during General Morrison's inspection was visible in the distance, a reminder of the day when everything began to change. She fingered her dog tags one more time, thinking about the information they contained, not just her identification and family background, but the story of a young soldier who had learned that earning respect was more valuable than demanding it, that leadership came from character rather than authority, and that true military service meant supporting your fellow soldiers even when they didn't support you. The road ahead would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new tests of her leadership and character. But Sarah felt ready for whatever came next, knowing that she had proven herself not just as her father's daughter or as a graduate of an elite training program, but as a soldier who understood what service and that respect, she knew, was worth more than any rank or recognition she might achieve in the future.